The cleaning crew at the Family Feud studio found Steve Harvey at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, sitting on the stage floor in the dark, eating dinner with a homeless man. Not filming, not rehearsing, just sitting cross-legged on the carpet under the podiums with takeout containers spread between them, talking quietly, laughing occasionally, completely unaware that the security cameras were rolling. The night janitor, Marcus Chen, had entered the studio to start his cleaning shift and found the stage lights off except for one work lamp, and two men sitting in its glow like they were camping. Marcus had frozen in the doorway, trying to process what he was seeing. Steve Harvey, the Steve Harvey, host of the show, worth millions, always gone by 7 p.m., sitting on the floor with a man who was clearly homeless. Worn clothes, overstuffed backpack, the particular exhaustion that comes from sleeping outside. Marcus had started to back out quietly, not wanting to intrude. And that's when Steve had looked up, seen him, and said something that would change everything. "Marcus, come here. I want you to meet someone. This is Joseph. He's been sleeping behind our dumpster for 3 weeks, and I just found out 20 minutes ago. We're having dinner. You want some?" The security footage captured all of it. Every word, every moment. And Steve Harvey had no idea he was being recorded doing something he'd apparently been doing in secret for years. Finding the invisible people in the margins of his world and treating them like they mattered. It was March 13th, 2025, a Thursday night at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. Taping had wrapped at 6:30 p.m. The audience had left. The crew had gone home. The building should have been empty, except for security and the night cleaning staff who arrived at 11:30. But at 11:15 p.m., Steve Harvey had still been in the building. He'd stayed late going through fan mail in his dressing room, something he did occasionally when he needed quiet time to decompress. At 11:08 p.m., he'd walked out to his car in the parking lot. And that's when he'd seen Joseph Miller, 58 years old, former construction worker, sleeping behind the dumpster enclosure with a blanket pulled over his head, and his belongings piled next to him in garbage bags. Steve had stopped walking. He'd stood there for 30 seconds, just looking. Then he'd walked over and said, "Excuse me, sir, are you okay?" Joseph had woken up, startled, disoriented, terrified he was about to be arrested or kicked out. Instead, Steve had asked him 4 questions. "How long have you been here? When did you last eat? Do you need medical attention? Can I help you?" And that wasn't even the part that would make the world cry. Joseph had answered carefully, trying to gauge if this was real or some kind of setup. "I've been here about 3 weeks. I ate yesterday. Someone left food in the dumpster that was still good. I don't need a doctor. And I don't know if you can help me, but I'd appreciate not being arrested." Steve had nodded slowly. "I'm not calling the police. I'm Steve Harvey. I host the show that films in this building. You've been sleeping behind our dumpster for 3 weeks and nobody told me. I'm sorry about that. Have you eaten today?" Joseph had shaken his head. "Not yet." Steve had said, "Okay, stay right here. I'll be back in 15 minutes. Don't leave." Joseph had assumed Steve was lying, that he'd call security, that this was the part where he got kicked out. But 15 minutes later, Steve had returned carrying 2 bags of takeout from a restaurant 3 blocks away. Chicken, rice, vegetables, bread, bottled water, coffee. Steve had looked at the dumpster area, concrete, cold, exposed, and made a decision. "We're not eating here. Come inside with me." Joseph had hesitated. "I don't think I'm allowed." Steve had cut him off. "I'm inviting you. Come on." He'd led Joseph into the building, through the back corridors, onto the Family Feud stage. He'd turned on one work lamp, sat down on the floor, and started unpacking the food. "Sit," he'd said. Joseph had sat down slowly, still waiting for the trap to spring. Steve had handed him a container. "Eat. I got enough for both of us." And they'd eaten together on the stage floor while the security cameras recorded everything, and Steve Harvey had no idea. Marcus Chen, the night janitor, had walked in at 11:47 p.m. and found them mid-conversation. After Steve invited him over, Marcus had approached cautiously. "Mr. Harvey, I didn't know you were still here. I can come back." Steve waved him off. "No, it's fine. Join us. I'm serious about the food. We have plenty." Marcus had declined politely, but Steve had insisted on introducing Joseph. "This is Joseph Miller. He's been living behind our dumpster for 3 weeks. I just found him. We're figuring out next steps." Marcus had nodded, processed this information, and then asked a question that would later become crucial. "Mr. Harvey, do you know the security cameras are recording right now?" Steve had looked up, surprised. "What?" Marcus had pointed to the ceiling. "Security cameras. They run 24/7. They're recording you right now." Steve had looked at the cameras, then back at Joseph, then back at Marcus. For 3 seconds he'd been silent. Then he'd said something that Marcus would later tell reporters was the most genuine thing he'd ever heard a celebrity say. "Well, I guess they're recording then. I'm not doing anything I'm ashamed of. Joseph needs help. We're having dinner. If someone wants to watch that on a security feed, that's fine." He'd turned back to Joseph. "You were telling me about your daughter." And they'd kept talking. The cameras kept rolling, and Marcus Chen had quietly left the stage, gone to the security office, and made a copy of the footage because he had a feeling it mattered. The conversation Steve and Joseph had on that stage floor lasted 93 minutes. The full security footage would later be released with Joseph's permission, and it would become one of the most viewed pieces of content in Internet history. But that night, it was just 2 men talking. Joseph told Steve his story. Construction worker for 32 years, good at his trade, reliable, proud of his work. His wife Linda had died of pancreatic cancer in 2019. Medical bills had destroyed their savings. Joseph had kept working, kept paying, but the debt was insurmountable. In 2021, his company had downsized. Joseph, at 56, had been let go. He'd looked for work for 18 months. Age discrimination was real. Nobody wanted to hire a 57-year-old construction worker when they could hire a 25-year-old for less money. His unemployment had run out. His savings were gone to medical debt. He'd been evicted in July 2024. He'd been homeless for 8 months. He'd been sleeping in different locations around Atlanta, trying to stay safe, trying to stay invisible. 3 weeks ago, he'd found the Family Feud studio. The dumpster enclosure was hidden from street view, somewhat sheltered, and the security guards didn't patrol that area regularly. He'd been sleeping there ever since, leaving early in the morning before staff arrived, coming back late at night after everyone left. He'd been careful, quiet. He'd thought he was invisible. Until Steve Harvey walked to his car at 11:08 p.m. and saw him. Steve listened to all of this without interrupting. When Joseph finished, Steve was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've been sleeping 20 feet from where I work every day, and I had no idea. That's unacceptable. I should have known. Someone should have told me." Joseph shook his head. "You're not supposed to know. Homeless people work very hard to be invisible. If we're visible, we get kicked out, arrested, harassed. Invisible is safer." Steve's response was immediate. "Invisible is not safer. Invisible is lonely. Invisible means nobody helps you." Joseph's voice was quiet. Nobody was going to help me anyway. I'm 58 years old with no home and no job. I'm not someone people help. I'm someone people step over. Steve Harvey looked at this 58-year-old man who'd worked for 32 years and ended up behind a dumpster. And his face did something the cameras caught perfectly. A complete transformation from shock to fury to determination. That changes right now. You're not invisible anymore. I see you, and I'm going to make sure you're okay. Steve pulled out his phone. Joseph started to panic. Please don't call the police. Please. I'll leave. I won't come back. Just don't. Steve put his hand on Joseph's shoulder. I'm not calling the police. I'm calling my assistant. I'm getting you a hotel room for tonight. Tomorrow, we're getting you housing. Real housing. Not a dumpster. Not a shelter. An apartment. Joseph was shaking his head. I can't afford. Steve interrupted. I didn't ask if you could afford it. I said I'm getting it. Stop arguing with me and let me help you. He dialed. A woman answered, groggy. Steve? It's almost midnight. Steve said, Becky, I need a hotel room right now in Atlanta for a man named Joseph Miller. Nice hotel, not a motel. And tomorrow, first thing, I need you to start arranging housing. I'll send you details. Becky, to her credit, didn't ask questions. I'll text you a hotel confirmation in 10 minutes. But Steve wasn't done. He made 4 more calls over the next 20 minutes while sitting on that stage floor. A benefits advocate to review Joseph's unemployment and assistance options. A job placement specialist who worked with older workers. A case manager from a Housing First program, and a contact at a construction company Steve knew through charity work. By the time Steve hung up his last call, Joseph had a hotel room for the next week, appointments scheduled with benefits and job specialists, a case manager assigned, and a preliminary job interview set up with a construction company for the following Tuesday. Joseph sat there crying, trying to process that his life had just changed in 20 minutes because he'd fallen asleep behind the wrong dumpster and the right person had found him. Steve stood up and helped Joseph to his feet. Come on, I'm driving you to the hotel. You're checking in tonight. You're taking a hot shower. You're sleeping in a bed. Tomorrow we start fixing the rest. Joseph was still crying. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Steve's answer was simple. Because 27 years ago I was sleeping in my car. I was homeless. I know what it feels like to be invisible. I know what it feels like when people step over you. And I promised myself that if I ever got out of that car, I'd help people who were where I was. You're where I was, so I'm helping you. It's not complicated. Joseph said quietly, Thank you. And Steve said, You're welcome. Now let's get you out of here. They left the building together. The security cameras captured them walking off the stage. Marcus Chen watched them leave, then went to the security office and made sure the footage was properly saved. He didn't know what he'd do with it yet, but he knew it mattered. The next morning, Marcus mentioned what he'd seen to a production assistant. The PA mentioned it to a producer. The producer mentioned it to the head of security. By noon on Friday, multiple people knew that Steve Harvey had spent Thursday night having dinner with a homeless man on the Family Feud stage. By 3 p.m., someone had asked Marcus if the footage still existed. Marcus said yes. By 5 p.m., the head of production had called Steve. Steve, we need to talk about last night. Steve was in his dressing room, preparing for Friday's taping. What about it? The producer explained. The security footage, multiple people knew, Marcus had made a copy. There were questions about protocol and liability. Steve listened quietly. Then he said, So what's the problem? The producer tried to explain. Having homeless people in the building after hours, potential safety issues, insurance concerns. Steve's voice went cold. Let me be very clear. Joseph Miller is not a homeless person like he's a category. He's a human being who was sleeping behind our dumpster for 3 weeks while we all walked past him. I found him, I fed him, I helped him. I'm not apologizing for that. And if anyone has a problem with it, they can take it up with me directly. The producer backed down. No one's asking you to apologize. We just need to know what to do about the footage. Steve thought for a moment. Then, let me talk to Joseph. If he's okay with it, release it. If he's not, delete it. His choice. His dignity. Steve called Joseph that afternoon. Joseph was at the hotel, still processing everything, still half convinced he'd wake up back behind the dumpster. Joseph, there's security camera footage from last night, of us having dinner on the stage. The studio has it. They want to know what to do with it. I told them it's your choice. If you want it deleted, it's deleted. If you're okay with it being public, I think it could help other people. But it's completely up to you. No pressure. Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Then, what would it mean if it's public? Steve explained. People would see Steve having dinner with a homeless man, would hear Joseph's story, might lead to conversations about homelessness and invisibility, and how we treat people who fall through the cracks. Joseph thought about it. Then, if it helps someone else, put it out there. I'm not ashamed of being homeless. I'm ashamed it took someone like you to make me visible. If the video makes other people visible, release it. Steve called the producer back. Joseph says yes, release it. But I want editorial control. I want to add context. I want people to understand what they're watching. The producer agreed. Steve spent Saturday working with the production team to edit the security footage into a coherent narrative. They added title cards explaining what people were seeing, transcribed the conversation so the quiet audio was accessible, added Steve's voiceover at the beginning and end, providing context. The final video was 47 minutes long. It showed everything. Steve finding Joseph, bringing him food, sitting on the floor, talking for 90 minutes, making phone calls, helping Joseph up, walking out together. It was raw, unscripted, genuine in a way that scripted television could never capture. Steve posted the video to YouTube on Sunday, March 16, 2025. The video was titled, Hidden Camera Footage, What Steve Harvey Does When No One's Watching. The description read, Security cameras at Family Feud caught me having dinner with a homeless man on our stage. I didn't know I was being recorded. I was just helping someone who needed help. Joseph Miller has given permission for this to be shared. Watch what happens when we actually see the people we walk past every day. The video went viral instantly. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 500 million times. Within 72 hours, it had been viewed over 1.8 billion times. Within a week, Steve Harvey, Joseph Miller, and Hidden Camera Homeless were trending globally. The response was overwhelming. People praised Steve for genuine compassion, for doing the right thing when he thought no one was watching, for proving that character is what you do when the cameras aren't rolling. Except the cameras were rolling, and he didn't know it, which somehow made it more genuine. Celebrities began sharing their own stories of helping homeless people quietly. Regular people started posting about the homeless individuals in their own communities they'd been ignoring. The conversation became a referendum on visibility, on how we treat people who live in the margins, on what compassion looks like when it's not performative. The backlash was minimal but notable. Some people questioned whether the video was staged, whether Steve had known about the cameras, whether this was calculated PR. Marcus Chen, the janitor, did an interview with a local Atlanta news station, confirming that Steve had genuinely not known he was being filmed, that the surprise on Steve's face when Marcus mentioned the cameras was completely real, that everything in the footage was authentic. The accusations faded. Joseph Miller became the face of invisible homelessness. The people who work hard to stay unseen, who sleep in corners and behind dumpsters, and in places you'd never think to look, who are afraid that visibility means violence or arrest or shame. Advocacy organizations used Joseph's story to illustrate that homeless people aren't always on street corners asking for money. Sometimes they're behind your building and you've walked past them for 3 weeks without noticing. The video became required viewing in social work programs, in urban planning courses, in conversations about housing policy. 1 month after the video, Joseph Miller moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Atlanta. Steve had arranged 6 months of rent prepaid while Joseph got back on his feet. Joseph had gotten the construction job. The company had hired him on a trial basis and been so impressed they'd made him full-time permanent within 3 weeks. Joseph's daughter, who he'd mentioned in the conversation with Steve, had seen the video and reached out after 2 years of lost contact. They were rebuilding their relationship slowly. Joseph was no longer invisible. He was housed, employed, reconnected with family, and stable. 6 months after the video, Steve launched the Joseph Miller Invisible to Visible Fund. Emergency housing specifically for people who'd been homeless long-term but were staying invisible. The ones behind dumpsters and under overpasses and in the places people don't look. The fund partnered with cities to do outreach in non-traditional locations, finding the people who didn't want to be found and offering them help anyway. Steve funded the first $12 million. Within a year, the fund had housed over 8,000 people who'd been living invisible. 1 year after the hidden camera footage, Joseph appeared with Steve on 60 Minutes. Joseph, now 59, looked completely transformed. Healthy, stable, employed, housed. When asked what the biggest change was, Joseph said simply, "I'm visible now. People see me. My coworkers see me. My daughter sees me. I see myself." When you're homeless, you disappear even from your own awareness. You stop thinking of yourself as a person. You're just a problem. Steve made me a person again. That's what the video did. It showed the world that homeless people are people, not problems. People. When asked about Steve, Joseph said, "He didn't have to help me. He didn't have to spend 93 minutes on a stage floor listening to my story. He didn't have to make those calls. He didn't have to get me a hotel and a job and an apartment. He did it because he saw me when I'd worked very hard to be invisible. That's all it took. Someone seeing me." 3 years later, Joseph is 61. He still works construction, now as a foreman. He's been promoted twice. He lives in his own apartment, which he pays for himself now. His relationship with his daughter is fully repaired. She visits monthly, calls weekly. They're rebuilding what was lost. He volunteers with the Invisible to Visible Fund, doing outreach, finding people sleeping in the places he used to sleep, telling them his story, offering them the same help Steve offered him. He's helped personally connect over 300 people to housing services. He's become an advocate, a speaker, a living proof that visibility can save lives. Steve Harvey posted a photo on Instagram in March 2028, 3 years to the day after the hidden camera footage. The photo showed Joseph on a construction site in his foreman vest, smiling, surrounded by his crew. The caption was 8 words. "He was invisible behind our dumpster. Not anymore." The post received 212 million likes. Comments flooded in from people who'd been helped by the Invisible to Visible Fund. from people who'd started paying attention to the invisible homeless in their own communities, from people who'd learned that compassion is what you do when you think no one's watching. To date, the original hidden camera video has been viewed over 3.2 billion times across all platforms. It's the most viewed piece of unscripted celebrity content in internet history. It's been used in ethics courses, in social work training, in conversations about performative versus genuine compassion. A documentary about Joseph and the fund premiered at Sundance in 2027. 15 cities have implemented invisible homeless outreach programs based on the fund's model. The video fundamentally changed how people think about homelessness, not as something that happens on street corners, but as something that happens in the margins, in the places we don't look, among the people working very hard to stay unseen. Joseph rarely does interviews anymore. When pressed, he gives a simple answer. I was behind a dumpster for 3 weeks. Steve Harvey walked to his car at the wrong time, or the right time, and saw me. That's the whole story. Someone saw someone and decided to help. That's all it takes. See people. Help them. Don't wait for cameras. Don't wait for credit. Just help. Steve didn't know he was being filmed. That's what made it real. Character is what you do when you think no one's watching. His character was solid. Mine is rebuilding. That's the work. In the Joseph Miller Invisible to Visible Fund headquarters in Atlanta, there's a screen playing the hidden camera footage on loop. It shows Steve and Joseph sitting on the stage floor, eating, talking, laughing, connecting. Below it, a plaque reads, "Character is what you do when you think no one's watching." Staff members watch it during training. People applying for services see it during intake. Joseph tells them the same story every time. I was invisible for 8 months. I worked very hard at it. Invisible felt safer than visible. Then Steve Harvey made me visible whether I wanted it or not. Turned out visibility was what saved me. Let us see you. Stop hiding. We're here to help. The game show runs on schedule. Contestants play and laugh and win money. But everyone who works on Family Feud knows what happened on March 13th, 2025. They know that Steve stayed late that night and found someone behind the dumpster. They know he brought him inside and fed him and helped him. They know he did it when he thought no one was watching. They know the security cameras caught everything. And they know that genuine compassion doesn't need an audience, but sometimes gets one anyway. Joseph Miller slept behind a dumpster. Steve Harvey saw him. The cameras saw Steve. The world saw what happens when someone actually looks at the people they walk past every day. And 3 billion people learned that character is real when you think it's private. If you've ever walked past a homeless person without seeing them, this story is for you. If you've ever been invisible because visibility felt too dangerous, this story sees you. If you've ever wondered what someone does when the cameras aren't rolling, this story answers it. Share it. The invisible people will recognize themselves immediately. And maybe, just maybe, someone will look behind the dumpster. Because Joseph Miller was there for 3 weeks. Someone finally saw him. That's all it took. Just someone seeing someone. The rest is just video footage of what compassion looks like when it thinks it's private.